So there is the season of playing and then there is the season of moving. And this right here is the show that follows all of the moving. It is the marketplace. Great to have you with us once again for a slightly different version this time around. Almost always we talk about players, where they're going and perhaps who's looking at them. Today we focus a little bit more on the guys in charge, the coaching positions, because there could be a few available between now and the start of next season. I'm Jack Heverin. Olgun Uluc is, of course, the best newsbreaker in Australian basketball. This is different. We haven't done this before.
No, I think last season we almost had none of this, right? There wasn't much of this. There was Scott Ninnis just on the sort of eve of the season, but this is new to the NBL, where we're going to have a lot of coaching turnover. So I'm excited to get into this.
Pete Hooley, welcome to you. You've got your ears, your eyes, your nose, every single body part across everything that's going on in this league at the moment. We have some jobs that we know are available. Also a couple that there's still a lot of discussion, but nothing concrete as yet.
Yeah, plenty going on. As Olgun said, you kind of alluded to it a couple of weeks back, that we've seen now some coaches move on, and then the whispers. And anytime you have an unsuccessful season, and for all different teams, all different organisations, that level of success changes, whether it could be winning a championship as the ultimate success. If we don't get there, we fail, or not getting to the playoffs again. All of that, everyone has different levels of the way they measure themselves. But yeah, I'm excited for this because there's always movement. And what was it? Only 5 years ago, it was unheard of to lose a coach in the middle of the season in the NBL. It was very, very rare. But to have coaches moving on in the middle of contracts, all of that, it's become more frequent. I think that's because the level of talent that we have around, everyone wants to continue to push this thing higher, and you need some of the best in charge to do that.
Let's start with what we know. Let's start with the jobs that we know are available right now. And the Brisbane Bullets, which, I mean, they were pretty swift. There was just a little bit of talks around Justin Schuller postseason. Mel Watson, their front office team, didn't waste any time, Olgun. They pulled the trigger, as we can see with the statement right now. And it also feels like a bit of a statement of intent to me.
Yeah, it was interesting. We heard whispers of this as the season was coming to an end, and then as the off-season for the Bullets began. There are things on the fringes here when you talk about perhaps Justin Schuller's leadership style. You talk about how perhaps some of the players felt about him, some of the injuries the team went through. All of those things feel like they're on the periphery. The messaging from this team, both internally and externally, has been about taking a step forward. And that feels very real to me. It does feel like they feel like Justin Schuller sort of maxed out what he could with this group, and that they want to take a step toward something bigger and better, with the hope of maximizing this even further, because this does feel like a win-now job for the Brisbane Bullets.
That's the key. The win-now statement is the one that I'm fixated on, because if you look back to before Justin Schuller got there and where the Bullets are at now, you can't say they're in a worse place, and you can't say they've just stood still.
They were a train wreck before.
They were, and so they've definitely made the progression forward in the right direction. But now with the talent they have, we saw glimpses of it this season. You feel like you're getting the idea from the Bullets, like, hang on, we're going to go and land a really big fish, someone who can come in here and lead us to where we believe. We're not just trying to make the playoffs. We want to be able to next year come in, and now we want to compete. We want to be in a championship series, and we believe that the head of that, whoever comes in, whoever we find, is going to help us do that. That's why you saw the statement commending Justin Schuller on what he did to bring them to where they are now. But now is go time, and we need to get this piece right in order to do that.
Is he unlucky, Justin Schuller?
Yes, purely because I think when the decision makers in Brisbane look at this roster, they feel like this is a roster that could really compete. And the idea of putting it in the hands of someone who's just finished his second season as a head coach, they don't feel like, they don't have the trust that he'll be able to maximize what this group is. And so in that respect, he is unlucky. Obviously, he got his first head coaching job, and that is a good thing in its own right. I'd say that it's maybe, I look at the other assistants around the league, and I wonder if they look at Justin Schuller, they look at Jacob Jackomis, and they wonder, we're going to be more selective about when we want to be a head coach, just because things can get very volatile in the head coaching ranks. And if you don't get it done early on, then you could be out of there. And we've seen some of the head coaches come in and have some success. You look at Josh King, you look at Justin Tatum. There are people out there who can come in and make an impact. If you don't make an impact, you could be out real quickly.
I think so, for more of that understanding of where he took that job. And anybody, and he's going to say, and the Brisbane Bullets are going to say it when you take over, we've got a team we've put together who we think we can win it all. If anybody told me that the Bullets could win all the last 2 years, they were kidding themselves.
Absolutely.
They weren't going to win a championship. They were building towards eventually being championship contenders, which the goal now is next year. You've got the talent, you've seen it when everybody's healthy, is to do that. So in that regard, he's mightily unlucky.
And that's why I asked the question, Pete, because it wasn't that long ago that it was internal warfare at the Brisbane Bullets. And Justin Schuller comes in. They've had a change in CEO, who's now the executive of the year, Mel Watts. They lost a lot of their staff. There's been a big turnover. He's kind of got them through all those stormy waters, and now he doesn't get a chance to actually see it through.
Yeah, it's tough. And again, it's the business side of pro sports, right? It's a brutal industry, not just for players, for coaches, for everybody involved. You get to these decisions that are out of your control, and you're sitting there thinking, look where I have got this club. Look what we've helped build up now. But the foundation's there. And again, you're always going to be judged on what happens next. So for the Bullets, in 12 months' time, they'll revisit it, whoever they go and land. But they make the right call. They bring in that key piece now. And they make a championship series, they'll say we made the right decision.
Well, here's just a quick look at the way that their contracts sit right now. Olgun, you mentioned this earlier, and at the time of recording, Sam McDaniel had just been re-signed, Casey Prather last week as well. To go with Tyrell Harrison, James Bateman, Mitch Norton, that's the crux of a fairly good NBL team right there.
It's a really good core. And when I say this is a win-now team, I think that's what this team is looking at when they're looking for this head coach, as someone who can come in and make an impact from day one. This won't be a project. So when we think about potential assistant coaches around the league who may have a desire to be a head coach, this doesn't feel like this is the location for them. The Brisbane Bullets will go and find someone who is perhaps more demonstrated, a bit more respected, have more of a commanding voice, someone who can come in from day one. And the roster that you mentioned, you think of Norton, Prather, Sam McDaniel, these are guys who've been around the league before. They need a respected voice to listen to from day one. I don't think the Bullets felt as though Justin Schuller was the guy who was going to do that from this point onwards to help them get to that next level. Whoever it is going to be someone who is a little bit more demonstrated and proven.
And this is the fun part about this Brisbane job. We'll talk about Cairns very shortly. It's a different scenario. It's a statement from Brisbane that they want to go big, Pete. There are some massive, massive names that we can talk about as being all well and truly credentialed enough to take this job.
Yeah, and you're picking up the phone and talking to them all, right? You try and see, and I think you said it recently about they're still very early days in that process because you don't want to take anything off the table. We've seen some great coaches come into the league and are now gone. Can you entice them to come back? Do you go and get a new voice? As you mentioned, Justin Tatum, Josh King, how successful they've been. But not only that, if you go and get that new coach or that new talent we haven't seen, what connections do they have? Whether it's key Aussies who are overseas, do they have a bit more enticement into bringing them back? All of that can be a flow-on effect, but they've got to nail it. They've got to go out there and make a big fish. I'm with Olgun. I don't think it's going to be an assistant coach locally. I think it's going to be someone either that we know or another really big name that comes in and puts them right at the forefront.
When you look around the league at some of the coaches who've come in recently and had success, Justin Tatum, Scott Roth, Josh King, what's the through line there? I think the Bullets see leadership as priority number one. X's and O's, they feel like comes with anybody. Anyone can come in, any assistant coach can come in and have a really good idea of X's and O's, but having that leadership piece to it, you look around the league, there's those coaches I mentioned, Dean Vickerman, Brian Goorjian. Teams are looking for that piece. That's like the priority for this team because they feel like that's the thing that's going to maximize this group.
I was waiting for one of you to say it. You haven't, so I will. Chase Buford is the name that comes up straight away, and as it should. He's got one of the best winning percentages that we've ever seen here in the NBL. He is available, from what I understand right now. A couple of links have already been put between Chase Buford and the Brisbane Bullets. Is he the number one candidate for this job?
He's not the number one candidate in the sense that they don't have a priority list yet when it comes to actual names. Chase Buford is, of course, unbelievably qualified when it comes to the NBL. He's 2 of 2. 2 seasons, 2 championships. From what I understand, people I've spoken to around the situation, he has signaled to those around him that he is open to the position. He's open to a return to the NBL, and that includes this Brisbane Bullets position. So if you are the Brisbane Bullets, it is, to put it lightly, in your due diligence to reach out to Chase Buford and see what he wants and see if there's a way to make that happen. That is the type of person I think they should bring in. He is someone who, if you speak to people around the Kings, has a commanding voice. He's obviously proven from a win-loss record. He ticks all the boxes, I think. When it comes to their priority list at this point, it is very, very early in the process. But you imagine if he's interested in them, which I'm told that he will be, then it is very reasonable for them to reach out to someone like that.
Which is exciting because within the couple of seasons gone by when he left, and there were some coaching vacancies, his name was floated about, hey, you go and get this guy, bring him back. And he didn't want to be a part of it. So the fact that now that he's signaling that he has interest in that is a really exciting thing. And absolutely you pick up the phone, because I think he'd be great. He'd be able to attract, that's a guy that you know. So he's come in, everyone wants to win a championship.
Yeah,
that's what players do. This is exactly why they sign up to play the game. That man only knows how to win championships. So if you get a guy of his caliber, all of a sudden you get his phone off the hook with players being like, Chase, I want to play for you.
There are obviously coaches, I should say, from overseas that we don't know about. It's hard for us to speculate on who they might be. So for us, it's more about speculating what we do know. We do know the credentials of Mody Maor. He nearly won a championship 2 years ago with New Zealand. He's now in Asia in a different situation. But even speaking publicly, and I know privately to some as well, he's always just kept the door slightly ajar for the NBL if the situation was the appropriate one.
He's another one where you just talk about everyone who's been around him and no one says a bad word because they just love playing for him. You go back, Will McDowell-White, Finn Delaney, when the New Zealand years, when they had to battle through everything. You talk about the COVID years, all the struggles, they make a grand final series, the way he carries himself, one of the best human beings going around, let alone a phenomenal coach as well. And I think anybody who coaches in the league, when they go overseas, they're always going to keep their eye on the league just because of the way it's growing and all the talent we have. But you never want to close that door because you know where you could potentially achieve, and it'd be another great call, similar to Trace Buford.
They're two of the coaches who obviously had some success in the NBL, left, and I know for a fact that they still keep tabs on the NBL. They're always asking questions. They're prodding. They're looking at the NBL.
We all know that Mody keeps tabs.
They look at the NBL to potentially poach talent as well. So they keep a really close eye on it. And you look at those two, again, the through line that we keep talking about is that leadership piece. They fulfill that, and they've demonstrated that not just throughout their coaching careers, but in the NBL as well.
Trevor Gleeson, almost no chance. Would that be fair?
I don't think Trevor Gleeson leaves his current position to enter a position like this. But again, he does tick all those same boxes.
And even if that's what you heard and we've been hearing it for the last couple of years, you still pick up the phone.
Absolutely.
And say, look, would you be interested? And maybe even start with what would it take for you to even get interested? Lead off with that, because you talk about success rates and winning. I mean, it doesn't get much better than Trevor Gleeson either.
The other one I want to ask you about, if we're thinking, I know that we're thinking that this is going to be more an experienced person's job. So hence we haven't spoken about highly credentialed assistants like a Jacob Chance, and we will get to some of those. Sam Mackinnon, we have to bring his name up because they used to have mad love, and now, baby, they got bad blood. Thank you, Taylor Swift. But there was a time there where Sam Mackinnon would have been an obvious candidate for this, but there's been so much that's gone on between Brisbane and Sam. Is there any possibility, do we think, from either Brisbane or Sam to entertain a conversation here?
I think Sam Mackinnon would be interested. He's still got connections in Brisbane as well through his family. But again, in the same breath, when I say that, this doesn't feel like an assistant coach is going to get this job because of what the Bullets are looking for, that necessarily means that Sam Mackinnon probably doesn't fill the criteria for what they're looking for at this moment in time.
Yeah, I don't think you're getting rid of Justin Schuller to bring in an assistant coach. Like, sure, I really don't think that's
the step forward thing.
That's what they talk about. It's aligning with our path. It really seems like all the assistant coaches are going to be out of a chance.
So to put a full stop on Brisbane for now, Olgun, you say they're in no rush at this stage?
They're not in no rush. They're at the start of their process, is what I'll say. It seems like they will entertain everything when it comes to some of the proven pieces out there that they could maybe look at. I could see them getting something done in the next month or two, but they're very, very early in their process as we speak right now.
Peter, I think it feels like a great job. I think if you're some of the names that we spoke about, or even someone from overseas who we haven't seen before, this is a good gig, I think, the Brisbane coaching job.
Well, again, we talk about the path that they've been on from being at rock bottom, and they are going in the right direction to not just potentially contend for a championship, but just building up as one of those destination clubs for big talent. But that's more so to the point of you want to get this done, one, correctly. That's the overall important thing. But two, as quickly as possible, because now you're in the off season. You want to start talking about that next talent, whether it's here, whether there's other Aussies you want to talk about who could be available, but even overseas talent, you want to get that done, because I know they've signed some and extended some with Sam McDaniel, Casey Prather, but players don't normally sign if there's no idea of who the coach is, because that can be very risky to your potential individual career. So they want to get that done as soon as possible.
And if we're going to treat this like a win-now situation in Brisbane, getting that head coach in place so you can get the best imports possible and the best potential local players possible, you should get this done as quickly as possible.
And we shouldn't forget the player option with Josh Bannon, which is a big part of the puzzle as well for Brisbane. So The Bullets is one job that I think we all agree needs an experienced person. I think the Cairns job, which is also available right now, is a very different conversation to the one we've just had.
It's just the nature of what that job is, which is the type of city that Cairns is and the type of team that they have to run, which is one that is generally, most often, the lowest spending team in the league. And it's often developmental. It often works in 2 or 3 year cycles. And this will be year one of this next cycle. There is practically nobody contracted on that team. So when you look at what Adam Ford did, he entered, he helped the program grow. That's what this next person will be coming in to do.
And it's also understanding that at the end of that cycle, you are likely to lose a lot of that high talent. That's just the way it works. And you put out the piece of all the numbers last year, and Cairns being the lowest spending team, that's not new. So that's one side of what you have to deal with, the community side. And don't get me wrong, it'd be a fantastic job. You hear the way they talk about being up there and players who have been there, what 40 it meant to everybody around. It's a great community, all of that. But it does come with some tough decisions having to be made and going through all of that and things you have to deal with, where if you're in Melbourne, if you're in Brisbane, if you're in Sydney, you don't have to deal with any of that. So there are some other things that you have to be aware of, and that's why it can be an intimidating role, I'll say, for aspiring coaches.
Let's put it into context. The Cairns Taipans last season was $6,000 above the salary floor. They didn't marquee Bull Koal's contract last season, because if they did, they would have fell under the salary floor. So that is the extent of how much money they don't spend, or they don't have the capacity to spend. So when you look at this job, in the same way that we talk about the Bullets being in the part of their process where they bring in someone proven, this does feel like the sort of job that can go to someone, perhaps a first-year coach, an assistant coach who can come in and start his or her journey from day one.
I don't want to over-dramatise this, but if we're looking at the Cairns Taipans situation right now, we didn't even bother to put a graphic up of who's under contract and who's not, because they're pretty much all out. So there's not much point putting it up there in the first place. So they've got no one signed virtually, and now looking for a new coach. This next 3 to 4 months for Cairns is very important, I think. And as I say, not to over-dramatise, but they've already got so many restrictions and so many things that they have to fight against. It feels like they're almost building a team from scratch.
It's part of a rebuild.
But it's also, that's probably the best way to go for it, because if you had 8 guys or 7 guys coming back and it's now for an aspiring head coach, an assistant coach, and you don't really get a say on that team and you're trying to implement your own style in a small market team, that's tricky. That's going to be really hard to do. With a blank canvas, you can kind of go in there and say, okay, I understand, here's the challenges here. Okay, what happens if a couple of players get hurt, like Cairns went through this year? I don't have the money available to go and replace them. So do I have enough talent on my bench to kind of put all those pieces together? I think they're in a really good spot in order for that. If it was the other side of it, like the Sydney Kings, you've got all these players coming back, a coach comes in and has to work with what they've got, that might be a little trickier.
I think the Cairns Taipans, the decision makers in that franchise, are hyper aware of what they are, which is a team that does need to start a rebuild. Look at the NBA. When Brad Stevens first went to the Boston Celtics, when Mark Daigneault went to the Thunder, these are Will Hardy to the Utah Jazz. These are the starts of a rebuild where this coach can get reps under his belt and he can help groom these players to get to a point where maybe after a year or two, you can then compete. We saw it with Adam Ford in year 2, where he was able to compete when Keanu Pinder was at the peak of his power. Sam Wardenberg had come in, Bull Koal. They nailed all 3 imports. You need to do this in process. It's a 3-year project, right? And they're entering year 1, and I think that means that you get your sort of entry level, and hopefully things grow from there.
And the understanding of it too is that window for you to compete and win is very small at the end of that too.
At the end of
that, because we've seen it with Keanu Pinder, even with Bull Koal, we've seen it when that high-level talent comes in, likely guys like Taron Armstrong, etc. When you build them up, when you have your swing and everything has to go right as well, after that, you're probably going to go back to start the cycle. And again, it's not a knock. It's something that they have to live with, and they've proven that it can work. It absolutely can work. You get it all right, you find this talent, and you put it all together. It's a Moneyball situation that you can have some fun and you can compete in this league.
And it's why I think they approach this. They don't get someone who is completely unproven. There are some assistant coaches around the league who have had success within their NBL programs that they're a part of, and also in the NBL 1 ranks as well. So you look at someone like Kerry Williams, who's an assistant coach.
Let's talk about Kerry Williams, because right now, Olgun, his name is being spoken about mostly in basketball circles about being the man to take the job.
So he will not be anointed as the head coach of this team. But if you connect the dots, Kerry Williams has been in Cairns. He was an assistant coach under Adam Ford. Adam Ford will play a role in picking this new head coach. And so he will be given a considerable option here, right? If we're under the impression that he will show interest in the job, which we are under the impression he will, there will be much consideration put into someone like Kerry Williams. Then you look around the league, some of the assistant coaches that we mentioned who are perhaps ready to take that next leap. You look at a Jacob Chance. I don't think he'll take this job. It feels like there are sort of bigger jobs out there that he might wait for. But I look at Illawarra. I think of like a Joel Carlu, someone who has a connection to Cairns. He's having a lot of success in Illawarra since he got there in the middle of last season with Justin Tatum. He does a lot of their defensive scouts. He had a lot of success with Mackay in the NBL 1. He's run a program before. So when it comes to assistant coaches in the NBL who are as demonstrated as anyone, Joel Carlu is toward the top of that list as well.
Yeah, it seems like for me, if you had to come and put two names forward, it's Joel Carlu or Kerry Williams.
Seems that way, doesn't
For the
it?
sake of, for the Cairns Taipans, they already understand that those two people already know how everything runs. So you can get rid of that. It's not like Jacob Chance coming in or Sam Mackinnon talking about assistant coaches and they have to learn and understand what it's like from the inside. They already understand all of that, and now you're just working forward on, okay, let's go and get talent and let's build it all up.
Seems that way. It's everything, like we said, we spoke about with Brisbane is the complete opposite with the Cairns Taipans.
And we have to understand, again, we describe Cairns and we don't want to treat them like they're the little brother, but they are a community-run club. And so someone like Kerry Williams, who has been part of that infrastructure before, someone like Joel Carlu, who has run a program before, he's run Mackay, that is a club in a regional town. These guys have demonstrated the ability to run programs or to be around programs that are successful like the Cairns Taipans, so they make a lot of sense.
So to the New Zealand Breakers, as they sit right now, Petteri Koponen is their coach for next season. I was thinking about this morning. This time 12 months ago, we sat here with Mody Maor at the helm of this team, with a group that had virtually all re-signed or they were in the process of signing. Since then, Mody's gone. Petteri Koponen came in, had them second at the FIBA break, and then they made one giant move that seemed to just put the whole thing into free fall after that. And now, as we're recording today, we're not totally certain at this stage that Petteri Koponen will come.
And I think we're not totally certain because any human, what would you be? Why would you be, after everything you've gone through? I mean, this is a guy who's come from the other side of the world, a head coach in a completely different country, a completely different league. When you come in, you're second on the ladder, everything's going well, and everything that transpired after that. So the only reason you become a little bit more uncertain is now the season's finished. You don't want to make any decisions like this when the emotions are high. So you wait a couple of weeks, you take some deep breaths, and you really go back and just look at everything and say, okay, we're going to go down this path again? Or is that enough to say, you know what, I think I need a different challenge altogether. I can't risk going down that path again. So there's a lot, obviously, to weigh up individually. I think he's a fantastic coach. I hope we don't lose him in the NBL, and especially, obviously, the New Zealand Breakers wouldn't want to lose him because at their very best, as I said, they were second on the ladder, and a lot of stuff was out of their control. The players speak so highly of him. But as in any case, it's inevitable. When things play out the way they did, you're just never 100% certain.
Yeah, the challenging nature of the season will make him a better coach. But it's also the sort of tension that makes us wonder, do you want to be part of that again? Where it looked like you were performing extremely well and then your season was upended for no good reason. Again, we're just thinking out loud, logically. It's very difficult to see someone wanting to be part of that again. And so that's why I think it's worth asking the question on whether Petteri does want to stay there, whether the Breakers want to start again. It feels like the Breakers do like Petteri. There's a reason they signed him in the first place. But the tension was real, and there are questions on whether you want to be part of that again.
Without sort of going right back over the Taco 4 Freddie Gillespie situation, a lot's been said about it, but do you think that has left scars with Petteri that might not be able to be healed?
Probably more so with the sake of when you're a head coach and like you understand that there's a business, we talk about with the Brisbane side, there's business decisions that have to be made, but also what comes with how much influence do I have in any of these business decisions going forward? I'm the one who has to put this team together. We want to win a championship. That's what it's all about. If all the NBL fans who have been around long enough to understand, that's all the New Zealand Breakers knew for a long time, is being successful and winning championships in the middle of the 2000s especially. So now it's like, okay, if something happens like this again and we are in this similar position, there's always change. An NBL season, as short as it is a very long season. There's always some tough moments we have to deal with. Will I have more influence or more control over that in the future? That's something that I need to understand before we start to go forward again.
And again, I can't stress that this change was made for no good reason. The Breakers were 7-3. So if a team is willing to sort of make this change above you for no reason, then
For ticket sales.
Right. It makes it very difficult for you to have trust in that organization, unfortunately. That's just the reality of it. And so, again, it is a very scarring situation to have gone through. And there has to be a process of rebuilding the trust that they're not going to do that to you again.
You know what else sells tickets?
Winning.
Wins.
Or the other things, I talked about that little analogy of going forward. So say there's a high-level importer comes in and then he gathers more interest overseas, whether it's a Europe out or an NBA out, and he wants to take that. It's like, well, in terms of any replacement that's available, do I then get the opportunity to go and get the piece that I think fits? Because that happens. We do see high-level talent come in and things pop up, whether it's mid-season, whether they wait. But if something happens and a player goes down, am I able to go and get the piece that I think is going to help us? Like, I am the head coach of this team and I want to have not necessarily full control, but as much control as humanly possible.
Just one little, I guess it's come up enough now that it's worth exploring, is that New Zealand have spoken about wanting to get more of a New Zealand connection back with this franchise and getting more New Zealand players back on the roster, having the entire nation buy in a little bit and feel like they're more a part of it. Could that include the coaching situation? I'm not suggesting that New Zealand would move Petteri on, but if Petteri decided that he wanted to move on, would they look to have a New Zealand flavour at the head coach role?
Actions over words. They've been saying this for a while, and there was no Kiwi that was in the sort of who was a finalist for this position. It came down to Petteri Koponen and Dan Sokolovsky, their assistant coach.
Yep.
Who Dan Sokolovsky is extremely qualified to be a coach in this league, but they didn't. It wasn't down to a Kiwi.
He's not from New Zealand.
He's not from New Zealand, even though he will be part of the staff for the New Zealand Tallbacks in the current FIBA window. But as much as they can sort of project that it is Kiwi first, and they do recruit Kiwi players. They are chasing Sam Wardenberg. They want to bring Kiwi players in. They have yet to show a propensity to have a strong interest in Kiwi coaches up until this point.
There's a couple out there. We talk about Poliganari a lot. I'm really high on trying to get him back to the league. Another one is over in Asia who's doing a very good job there. But the player side is the interesting part because a lot of those big Kiwi signings they want play a very similar position. So it's the Sam Wardenberg, Tim Delaney, Yanni Wetzel. Sam Menenga's there already. Don't forget that Taco Fall's signed on already. So you lose that one spot. You've still got other guys in that similar position you'd have to try and play around. So it's very unique.
Anyone think Parker Jackson-Cartwright's coming back next year to New Zealand?
Not to New Zealand. And I'd say it's unlikely that Taco Fall, who is contracted, I'd say it's unlikely he returns to it.
Okay, let's try and make sense of what's going on in Adelaide. No one's been able to make sense of it all season long. We'll have a go at it here on the marketplace. Half-time of the sudden death play-in game, they're on their way to a semi-final series against Illawarra. And then we see one of the great capitulations, I think, in NBL history. Now we start to talk about what happens next with this team, because at times we have had reports of star player taking a swing at the head coach. We've had players talking about being unhappy with the coach. We've had the coach talking about how challenging it's been to try and get all of these personalities on the same page at the same time. What happens next with the 36ers?
So, again, we are all aware of the volatility that occurred behind the scenes over the course of the entire season, from practically day one up until the end of the season. Now, the 36ers messaging, both privately and publicly, has been that Mike Wells is the guy. He's someone who they want to keep on, and they would like for him to be the head coach next season. So that seems like that is where we are headed. They are also very intent on keeping Kendrick Davis. And from what I understand, they're at a point where they're talking numbers now with regard to the hope of keeping Kendrick Davis. Now, it is also no real secret that there has been some friction between Kendrick Davis and Mike Wells. And from what I understand, the team and the decision makers are hopeful that relationship can be mended over the course of the off-season to the point where it is in a healthy enough place to start next season, assuming they keep Kendrick Davis, of course. Now, obviously, basing an entire off-season on hope is maybe not the most logical thing, but with a talent like Kendrick Davis and the idea of not having to pay another head coach to not coach your team, hope is sort of all they have at this point. So, again, as of now, it does seem like Mike Wells will stay on, but the Kendrick Davis piece makes it somewhat interesting.
Well, what you're seeing now is a cutout from the 36ers website, Pete, of all the wording is around next season with Mike Wells. It's all, there's no if, buts or maybes. It is all around Mike Wells coaching this group next year.
Yeah, and again, when you've locked him in for however long he's got left on his contract, you've got to go down that path. And I think for him, you mentioned it similar to when situations don't work out. It's right now, it's still be very raw and very fresh the way that it all abruptly ended. It's taken a really big, deep breath and understand this was an assistant coach for his whole career until he got this. So then jump up into a head coaching role when you're having to deal with all these different personalities. You've got to try and remove yourself from the situation as possible as that is and be like, I was thrown into a situation where probably any assistant coach that gets thrown into that is going to probably struggle with. What degree of struggle is different for each of them, but to have to do that as your first head coaching role, it's going to be hard to find the ultimate success because the personalities just didn't work. And Jason Kennedy was talking about it yesterday in the media, saying they had some strong personalities. We all saw it. We all hear things from the inside as well. So that's one side of it, but also what happens next year then? Okay, if we're in a similar situation where Kendra Davis comes back, if we bring in some other guys who are untested in the NBL, I don't know their personalities, and we enter that same boat, am I going to be the one who's thrown out first again? That's something you've got to weigh up and understand. I don't want to be on the outer. If we're going to go down this path with me, I want you to have my back and understand that I'm doing everything right. And when the tough decisions have to be made, you'll have my back to do that.
How big of a factor, Olgun, is something that you mentioned around paying out previous coaches? Because if Mike Wells doesn't stay or is moved on, that's another one. Like at some point, this is all going to stop, doesn't it?
It's a mixture of paying coaches to not coach your team and also the perception of not having a stable franchise where you're constantly moving from one coach to another. The 36ers, their owner Grant Kelly, does not want to do either of those things. The preference is to keep someone like Mike Wells on board. We talk about New Zealand's season being upended to an extent. Adelaide's was too, with a head coach being fired right before the start of the season, and then bring in someone like Montrezl Harrell, who I don't think was a natural fit on the roster, but is a talented player in his own right. And so he was someone who Mike Wells had to sort of maneuver around both on and off the court from a playing perspective and from an emotional perspective. And then everyone else had to sort of be malleable around him as well. And so I can appreciate people who would give Mike Wells a mulligan for this past season for that team not making the playoffs, purely because he was inserted late and it was an awkward roster to sort of build around. With a roster with more balance with an entire offseason, I think that's when we can really judge what Mike Wells can do as a head coach in the NBL. Until then, I don't think we know yet.
The stability is so key for the 36ers. If anyone's been along to a game this year, like the fans, it should be a destination for high-level talent, both imports and local Australians, key guys, because the city gets around you. I've spoke to a lot of players who are not there anymore, who've been there within the last 3 or 4 years, and all they wanted to do was spend the rest of their career at Adelaide. For living purposes, if you've got a family especially, but everything should be so positive. So stability is key. One, from internally, but also from the outside in, for players to want to go there and say, okay, I'm not just going to go there for 1 year and it's going to be all over the place. I want to go there, I want to settle down, I want to build this up, and I want to contend for championships.
Here's a look at their contract situation right now. We haven't got Kendrick Davis under contract, but it sounds as if that's getting closer, so he'll move from the right to the left. Isaac Humphries and Dejan Vasiljevic are under contract. DJ in particular has spoken about how Adelaide loves him and he wants to be there forever and all that sort of stuff. What do we think? I mean, are they both back next year? They are under contract, but sometimes you can find a way out of those.
They're both under contract. I'll just say this, and this isn't specific to this situation, but a lot of contracts are easy to get out of.
That's why I asked the question.
Just for one reason or another. I wouldn't imply at any point just yet that is the case with either of these two, but I think it's worth noting how challenging the season was for both of them. Both of whom, I think, had to I think they both signed contracts expecting one thing, and then it was immediately upended. And so I think that's something that's worth putting consideration into, that these two, the idea of getting a marquee level player for multiple seasons is such a cool thing. It's a really valuable thing in the NBL. The 36ers did that, and then I don't know if they treated them as well as one should treat a marquee player, just by the nature of the imports, the style of the imports that they brought in. And just by the nature of the season, how volatile, how dramatic it was.
And this is the whole key with exit interviews, which is going on for all the clubs that aren't playing finals now. Last week, this week, they'll be having exit interviews. You sit down with the coach, organisation, and you let probably all of that off your chest, understand, okay, I'm here for the next couple of years. What are we doing next year to make sure, one, this doesn't happen, but two, to maximise my individual talent, but also the whole team's. As I said at the top, everybody wants to win a championship. And as good as Adelaide showed they could be, I've said it many times, at any point in the season, they were a 20-point lead, better team than everybody. The other side of that was more of the case where they can be a 20-point deficit team.
Yes.
And it got ugly. So that's the other side of it. How can we be consistent, but how can we maximise it? And it all starts with taking a deep breath, getting everything off your chest, and now looking for the future.
Let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the Sydney Kings here. And to be really, really clear, Brian Goorjian is under contract until the end of the 26-27 season. So we're not for a second suggesting that Brian Goorjian is in jeopardy. Let's have a listen first to what he had to say after their loss in the play-in game to the Adelaide 36ers.
I know what we need, and I think there's a formula to this where you have 3 good imports and you have 2 marquee players. We started the season with 2 imports and 2 marquee players, and one of our marquee players, Bukwal, has been not able to train and has been carrying a leg all year. Marquee situation there. And then you play tonight without Xavier, who's your other marquee. So really you're playing in a game like this and you're getting into the top 4 and you're playing with 2 imports and, you're young Australians. And so moving forward, if you want to win a championship, I think we've got some really nice young pieces, and I think the glass is half full, but we're going to need 3 imports and 2 marquee players to beat a Perth or to beat a United coming down the backstretch. So
there's Gorge. He's talking about what the formula is and what makes up a good NBL team. Was there a little bit of a disconnect at times this year, particularly with the point guard position, between Brian Goorjian and the front office?
I think there was disconnect everywhere just for the sake of this team did not meet the expectations that they had, and probably a long way off. And again, for everybody saying it's easy now in hindsight, I see people commenting online, everyone's saying, well, this was just never a championship contender. Wrong. This team was put together. This team won the offseason because they went and signed some key free agents to contend for a championship. They didn't just fall short. They fell well short. So when it comes to that, again, with the exit interviews, you take a deep breath, understanding, okay, our season is over. Where do we go wrong? And normally when a team falls that short, something's got to give there in the playing group. Brian Goorjian's not going anywhere. This is the greatest of all time. This is one of the greatest coaches we've seen in the world. So it's more of, okay, how do we support that in the future? What little tweaks do we have to make here or there so that next season, whatever roster's there, this is the Sydney Kings. They won back-to-back championships not too long ago. We need to get back to that. And finishing 5th, bailing out in the first round of the play-in, it can't happen again. Because for all the talent that was there, and they had a lot of things, injuries and players missing late, they can't be in that position again. And I think that they always seem to find a way to get it right. They've got some absolute geniuses in the head office. Chris Pongrass, one of the best at what he does. So now it's like, okay, let's not make any emotional decisions, but let's just make some strong tweaks.
Yeah, and let's get one thing straight. Brian Goorjian ticked off on every signing they had this offseason. There's no disconnect between the front office and Brian Goorjian. They work in unison, and everyone ticks off on all of these signings. And again, when we look at that roster, this was a championship-level roster. Yeah. Yes, in hindsight, now that we can see their record and see some of the deficiencies, we can point and say, hey, maybe they need to fix this, or this. You can point to that with every team, even teams that are currently in the playoffs.
Yeah.
If Melbourne somehow came 7th, we can point to, hey, they probably needed this, and this. So I think the roster build was still largely fine. I agree that you look at how they operated, they were the number 1 defense this season. So you give them a tick there. They were bottom 4 offense. So you wonder, okay, did this coaching staff maximize Xavier Cooks? Were they able to maximize the rest of the roster outside of Jalen Adams? I'd say the answer was no. And so you think of what can they do on the fringes to make this team competitive, because they're bringing a lot of their roster back. You think the continuity would help. We look at the roster and we think it's really talented. What sorts of things can they do on the fringes to elevate this roster going forward?
Well, that's their roster that we're having a look at right now. As you can see, they're more well-placed than just about any team in the league in terms of who's coming back next season. 2 names that aren't or haven't appeared on any of these discussions or any of these graphics are Kevin Lish and Fleur McIntyre, who weren't part of the coaching staff this year. Did we just slightly underestimate, because Brian Goorjian is Brian Goorjian, and he's all-encompassing, and he brought Billy Tomlinson back with him, but is that an area that they might look at, potentially around the assistants and just bringing some different intel into this group?
I think you just have a look at everything. Nothing's off the table, as I said, because you're not getting rid of Brian Goorjian. You're not making any of these crazy decisions this early. You're just going and say, hey, where do we make those tweaks? And go back to a couple of years ago, we won 2 championships on the basis of what? What was it? Was it just the talent? Was it all Chase Buford? Was it all the key pieces? You mentioned Kevin Lish, Fleur McIntyre. So what makes a good coach, by the way, is not just that individual. It's everybody around them.
Yeah.
Because anyone who's been part of it, especially in professional basketball ranks, understands that for 12 guys, if there's a next star as well, they could very well be broken up into groups of 4 and go have a better relationship with the assistant coach than they do with the head coach. That is not unusual. That is very common. That I understand. I'm maybe not going to talk to Brian Goorjian to air my frustrations. I'm going to go and talk to Daniel Kickett for this year. I'm going to vent my frustrations. I work out with him every day. So the assistant coaching role in order to succeed is so important, probably just as important as what the head coach can deliver on the day.
Yeah, the Kings are very early in the process of sort of figuring out what tweaks they need to make, across the roster and things like that. But I agree. If you look around the league, think of Scott Roth. Like the input he gets from something like Jack Fleming is so helpful. You look. I was at Illawarra Hawks practice the other day, and Sam Grogan, Joel Carlew, Matt Flynn. Like these are high level pieces around all these guys. And you look at Melbourne United, Jacob Chance, Dave Barlow, Reece Carter. Like there are some high level. So I think we can look at entire coaching staffs as what is valuable, not just the man or woman at the top of it, right? It's not just about the head coach. But I'll stress that the Kings are super early in the process of figuring out what they need to tweak, maybe the roster pieces they need to bring in. It's very early in their process, but they also know that they built a good roster. It didn't work out this time. There are tweaks they need to make. They're not sitting on their hands.
And just a quick anecdote to back that up. I mean, you saw the turnaround from the Phoenix Ride in that game. They had the worst first half in their whole season. That's crazy to say for a team that was 0-5. But from all the reports coming out that Josh King walked in at halftime, just had a couple of things to say. He was pretty reserved, walked out, and then Sam Mackinnon said, "Shut the door." And Sam Mackinnon said something that obviously got this team fired up. So every single part of that little coaching staff, every role has to be the perfect puzzle piece in order to succeed. And that's why the Illawarra Hawks are the best team in the league. That's why you see Jacob Chance on his feet more than Dean Vickerman at times with Dave Barlow. All those key pieces are crucial.
So in light of that, just the last one on the Kings, Olgun. With everything that we've just spoken about, do you think there's a world where they could entertain going and getting one of the best young assistants in the country? Let's just use Jacob Chance as an example, or someone of that ilk. And they work under Brian Goorjian for the next 2 years as the lead assistant with a view to potentially taking over from Brian when his contract is finished.
I think it's too early to say. I don't know if the Kings are going to overreact to year one of what I think they saw as a 2 or 3 year window.
Sure.
It's not, and I'll say this, it's not a 2 or 3 year project. This wasn't, we'll be okay in year one, good in year two, and great in year three. They're trying to be great all 3 years. But they know that this is year one of Brian Goorjian, Xavier Cooks, Bull Kowal, a lot of these guys, Tyler Robertson, Kelly Leao-Pepe, everyone's signed for 3 years. So it's year one of this experiment. I don't know if they're going to overreact after the first season. Yes, there are tweaks they need to make on the fringes, but I don't know if they're going to do a full-blown, ginormous move to try and fix them.
We don't often see the succession plans in the NBL.
No, and it was just thinking about it the other day, whether you wonder whether it is something that they would start to
And maybe it is the club's card to look, because I know there's some high-level coaches, and the league is such a strong position where you can attract those high-level coaches. But we also talk about the guy we mentioned, Jacob Chance or Carlew, Sam Mackinnon, these guys who are just ready for an opportunity. Maybe that does come with, and you're looking at Chance behind Dean Vickerman. At what point does Dean Vickerman say, I've had enough success here, I'm bored of being successful here, I want to go and have a new challenge? Because at some point, the human nature side of that would be inevitable. And maybe that's something that in the long-term prospect of Jacob Chance being like, maybe Melbourne is where I'm going to be at and I've got to do this a couple more times. So I'd like to see it. I think succession plans can be really successful. We just don't often see it here.
Lastly, the Tasmania JackJumpers, only because the championship run is over for now. They didn't make the playoffs, so they'll be looking at everything. There have been some whispers at times across this season about Scott Roth, perhaps looked a bit tired and a bit frustrated with a lot of different things over the course of the season. But everyone that I've spoken to in Tasmania, Olgun, is adamant that Scott Roth's coming back next year.
Yeah, the overwhelming consensus and the intel around the entire league is that Scott Roth will be back. This feels like this is still his team. You can, again, I say give Scott Roth a mulligan. They were very injured last season, I think, and it's weird because when they weren't injured, they were obviously better. So you can point to the injuries as a very causal thing for their lack of success this past season. But it doesn't feel like Scott Roth is in any hot water of any sort at this point. There is a high level of confidence that he'll be around next season.
Yeah, I don't think he's in any hot water from the things that I hear either. I think that for Scott Roth, we know he announced the extension earlier in the year in terms of when he's done with Tasmania, he will be done on his own accord because he's brought this club. He's one of the greatest sporting stories we've seen to win a championship 3 years into their existence. That when he wants to go, when he thinks it's time, they'll support him and do that. But I think he'll be back next year because Can't imagine a Tasmania. You have to peel him off the wallpaper to get him out of Tasmania.
Might be the next premier of Tasmania. So maybe that is his next job once he's finished with basketball. Their contract situation, Will Magnay, Sean McDonald, Majuk Deng coming back, Archie Woodhill coming back as well. So there's, from an Australian point of view, the core is there.
And again, when all of that crew was healthy this season, they went on that 8-game winning streak for a reason. Right? It's because Sean McDonald was healthy. It's because Will Magnay was there for a big part of that. Once these guys are healthy and you can build a roster around them, recruit imports that fit what they do, then I think they'll be in a good place. And I think at the 36ers should look at the JackJumpers as a prime example of what they should try to be. And I think the Sydney Kings should as well.
Yep.
These are teams with marquee players. Put imports around them that I think are complementary to their skill sets, as opposed to just bringing in talent that's in a vacuum and just hoping that they all work out next to each other. You need to build a balanced team.
You only get 3 imports. So you need to have some key locals. And it's not just the marquee guys, right? It's the Sean McDonalds. I mean, it's those extra complementary pieces that go around your imports and they help. And that's what we see with the 4 best teams in the league.
So that is everything from a coaching perspective as it sits right now here as we lead into NBL 26. Some jobs available and maybe just 1 or 2 that might be available between now and the next time that we get together. Gentlemen, thank you to both of you. Great work, great intel.
Thank you, mate. Always fun.
Thanks, Jack. This always goes longer than we plan it to go.
I know, I've got to pay for parking. This expired about half an hour ago.
Tom cooked that.
We've got a lot to talk about. Stay up to date with all the latest at nbl.com.au. Thanks for watching and we will see you soon on The Marketplace.